I'm David Farmer from the American Institute of Mathematics. Today we're going to talk about the role of the job talk in the hiring process for a tenure-track position in mathematics. As we will see, the purpose of the job talk is to demonstrate that you have the potential to be a good teacher. It's not for you to blow everyone away with your wonderful research.
You've been invited to campus, and one of the things you'll be asked to do is present a talk about your work. And the job talk serves many different purposes depending on what kind of school you're at. But one of the important things that is relevant to many of the schools is that it's the first time people will get to see you at the board or at the screen, presenting your work. And that's a nice way to tell how people are going to be in the classroom. One of the things that you would want to find out about is who is your audience for this talk? Is your talk going to be to the rest of the faculty, or is it going to be a talk primarily to undergraduate students? And you want to find out a little bit about this, and that happens in the exchange as you're preparing for the interview.
Know the first sentence you're going to say, in particular the first word, and exactly say that sentence. It'll calm you down and it'll be a good sentence. The most common first two words of talks is, okay, so. Okay? Know your first word in your first sentence and say it, and don't start with okay, so. Now what I mean is the first sentence after the thanks, if you give thanks. Now some people give thanks and some don't. I happen to don't, and that's a reflection of my personality, not a reflection of best practice. Either way is fine. I'm guessing that at a job interview talk, thanking them for the opportunity to speak is probably a good thing. So you may want to err towards thanking, but it can be very brief. But then the first sentence after, so that thanks should start with the word thanks, not okay so, and then the sentence after that should be the sentence you prepared in advance. What do these 5 things have in common? Okay, hosting a talk, playing golf, playing poker, writing LaTeX, and giving a colloquium or job talk. Okay. Well, I've identified 3 things that they have in common. Most people receive little formal training before embarking upon these endeavors. Everybody can play poker, everybody can play golf. Okay? So what you end up doing, since you have no formal training, is you either invent out of thin air what to do, or you copy the bad habits of other people. Okay? As a consequence, most people do these things poorly. But also, for all of these, just a few basic principles can make you far better than average. Okay? So for the first one, Sally explained the principles of hosting a talk. You're already above average at doing that. Okay? You need help from other people to improve your golf game or to play better poker. I'm happy to talk to you about writing LaTeX during off time. But what I do want to tell you is some principles about giving a colloquium or job talk. And let me explain why I group colloquium and job talk together. Lots of you have taught, maybe all of you have taught. And you've also written papers. And you've either written or read textbooks. All of these things are types of mathematical exposition. And what I've shown here is how I see the spectrum of different types of mathematical exposition. The traditional, what we think of as real mathematics, is very formal, and that's at the top, and it goes definition, theorem, proof, theorem, proof, theorem, proof. That's what your research papers look like. That's what seminar talks tend to look like. Okay? At the other end is you have things like teaching and the job talk and the colloquium, which are very informal. They're driven by examples. You have terminology more than you have formal definitions. And while there are theorems and proofs, somebody once said every good math talk contains a proof. That's probably true, but often it's a proof, and I've written it in quotes because it's not like you're nailing down every single detail. If I explain to you the idea and you get it, that counts as a proof in the context of a talk. Also in this spectrum, at the top, who's the audience of a research paper? One person reading it repeatedly for a long time. Seminar the audience is a small group of homogeneous people who you can assume have something in common. By the time you get down to the bottom, there's more people and there's a great diversity among those people. And that has to affect how you do your exposition, okay? And let me elaborate a little bit more about what I mean by examples and terminology. So this is a math talk, so we need theorems and proofs. So our first, well, it's a proposition. So my proposition is, usually it is not helpful to state a formal definition in a colloquium talk. Okay, so what's the proof? The proof breaks into cases depending upon the audience members. Okay, so case one, there's the people in the audience who already know the definition. Well, obviously it's a waste of time to tell them the definition. Okay, well, case two, the people who don't already know the definition. Well, unless it's something really simple, telling them the definition is probably also not helpful. They need examples and discussion and context to get that. If my talk is on Hopf algebras, writing down a commutative diagram with 7 things in it that's in the definition of a Hopf algebra is not going to tell you what a Hopf algebra really is. On the other hand, you are all aware of objects which can be given a Hopf algebra structure, in which case I could say those objects, say which aspects of them are relevant, and then say the things with these properties are called Hopf algebras. So I'm not giving a definition, but I am giving terminology. And I'm also advocating that the examples come first. And then, so it's not definition followed by example, it's example followed by definition, or better yet, example just followed by terminology. We've already discussed the outline. Next proposition is never use an outline. This proposition, the proof also breaks into 2 cases, depending upon the nature of the outline. Well, if your outline is completely devoid of relevant content to your talk and could apply to any other talk, well, of course it's a waste of time to say that. On the other hand, maybe your outline does mention some key topics. And my one from my bad talk did, because it had other symmetry types. What was I forced to do? I was forced to try to explain some complicated thing from the end of my talk in the middle of explaining the outline, which satisfied no one. The alternative being I don't even try to explain it, and then it's even more confusing. So such outlines also are a waste of time. So since that covers all cases, that completes the proof. Right? But I know you've seen lots of talks with outlines, so I'm saying, what do you do instead? And this was already mentioned in the discussion. You want to think of giving the talk as storytelling. Start just by beginning to tell the story. And I was greatly influenced in this by Henrik Evanietz, who's at Rutgers. In his graduate course, every semester, all the students have to go to the board and present some result. So what do? They walk to the board and they start writing. And Henrik says, say some words. So they turn around confused, like, what do you mean? And he repeats, say some words. At which time, they start talking about the result they're going to present and its proof. It's almost always extremely clear, a great introduction to it. So that's, I think, a great way to start any colloquium talk. Just say some words. You may actually mention quite a bit or just delete part of your outline. The outline still exists as an abstract object describing your talk. I'm just telling you not to put it up on the screen. The outline will inform your exposition, and you may, in fact, mention things about it in your introduction, but it's not going to look like an outline. All right? Now, I don't want to overwhelm you with lots of do's and don'ts, but let me just get to a few more principles. The first one we already mentioned. Know the first sentence you're going to say. Know whether or not you're going to thank the person who introduced you or thank the institution before you begin. Second, we've just started talking about the idea of storytelling. So you're telling a story. What does it mean to tell a story? You set the scene. You introduce the characters. You do character development. There's a plot. You foreshadow things which are going to come. There's connections and there's excitement. Okay? Part of the idea of a short story is that it's meant to work toward one thing. As you're planning your job talk, decide first what of your result is going to be the culmination of your talk. What exciting thing are we going to tell them about? Once you know that, you want to work backward to the beginning. Don't include anything that's not relevant to the thing you want to tell them about. Okay? It's not a novel, it's a short story. Right? There's two ways in which the material you present can be useful. You want people to understand and appreciate your work. And those are two different things. Understanding requires some definitions or terminology. Appreciate involves some amount of context as what's been done before, what are the consequences of what you're doing. So keep in mind that the talk isn't, people don't really understand your results unless they understand and appreciate them. So you're doing two things. And eradicate everything that's not relevant to that in your talk and start by working backward. The third main point here is transitions. The outline, which you're not showing, is kind of like chapters or sections of your story. Between chapters, things shouldn't change abruptly. Things should flow in a natural way. When you've ended one part of your talk and starting another talk, you can do a transition by wrapping up what just happened and introducing what's going to happen next. So you're doing mini wrap-ups and introductions throughout your talk. This is a very effective way at giving the impression that you have a clear and organized talk. Okay? You want people to leave saying, oh, I followed that. That was pretty good. A really great transition will, if someone woke up right before you did it, they'll be on board, ready to pay attention again. Or if they just arrived late, they'll be on board. Okay? Let me do a transition. So way in the middle of a talk that I was just giving, okay, we come here. So that's the conjecture we made about the maximum size of that z function. Recall from the first slide, it got bigger when t was larger, and that's our conjecture for how big it goes. And we got this conjecture in multiple ways by thinking probabilistically. One of the tools we use is what's known as a moment of the zeta function. So the 2kth moment of the zeta function is defined as the average of the 2kth absolute value of the zeta function on the half line. Conjectures for how big this moment is, or the size of this moment, will be one of the ways that we arrive at that conjecture for how big the function itself gets. Okay, that's my transition. Okay, so the idea is you're supposed to be willing to start paying attention together again if you dozed or stopped paying attention before. And punctuating these throughout your talk is helpful. And it can't hurt to be really blatant about it. If you're standing here while you're explaining something, step away. It'll draw their attention, summarize what you just did, introduce what's going to happen next. People will give the impression that they're following what's going on. You rarely want to read your slides, so I don't think you need a slide for the transition. Okay? And so one of the exercises you want to do once your talk is written out is figure out what are the sections and how to do the transitions. All right. And it's perfectly fine to end abruptly. Thank you. Okay, I'll answer, but other people may contradict me. I think you want to give what will be a good talk of interest to the whole department. If there happens to be people in the department interested in your particular research, then they'll know about, you'll talk to them about these other more important results. But I think the job talk's more about will you be okay in the classroom than it is persuade me that you're a great researcher. Now at a big R1, maybe it's different, but at a place that it all values teaching, that's really the secret reason. And so many people, after a minute, you may as well not pay attention. It's obvious that they're not going to be good in the classroom. And that's what I'm trying to help you avoid. I wouldn't choose something you've moved on from, because you don't want and one of the obvious questions is, so what are you planning to do next? Okay, so those future hosts in the audience, what things are you planning to work on next is an almost always safe question if no one else can think of a question. So you don't want to say, well, I'm not working on that anymore. So don't use your thesis work if you've really moved on to a totally new area. But I think all of us are telling you that it's the quality of the talk and the entertainment value more than the high-powered mathematics in the talk. You're going to meet with many of the people in the department, and you'll talk to them about what your current research interests are, and they'll have one-on-one sessions with you. the talk isn't doing everything. It's not doing all that.
What we expect is we do have our undergraduates at the talks as well. And we expect that the undergraduates will follow the first 10, 15 minutes, and then it's going to, and then they're going to be dropping off as they get, the more junior ones first and then the later ones. But so it's really, that's a hard talk to prepare for, because you're really talking to the faculty, but you want to start at a level where some students will at least get a sense of it. And a nice way to do is to wrap up at the end with future projects where you can sort of bring in the things that the questions that you opened at the beginning, to sort of, bring the people who sort of did fall off back together. It sort of, wraps it up.
If you can give a good chalk talk, that would be good. There's nothing wrong with a good chalk talk. I couldn't give this talk because I need to project that thing. So I would have to change my topic. That doesn't even mean I would use this as a job talk. I might not, because I might choose to give a chalk talk.
Even when you are using slides, the blackboard is always within arm's reach. And especially during question time, reaching for a piece of chalk and working really indicates a comfortableness about sort of conveying information. So I think that's always at your disposal. You don't feel like you're not allowed to pick up anything except the stupid laser pointer.
It depends upon why it happened. Okay, so you better have practiced and revised your job talk several times with several different friends watching it. And I'm more concerned that you're running short on time and you haven't planned ahead what you're going to jettison. And it's very unlikely you want to jettison the last few slides. So you need to know a plan. So what if a great thing happens and there's loads of questions in the early part of the talk? All of a sudden you're behind and you start panicking and you haven't planned what you can skip. Well, so you need to know in advance what you're willing to skip. Okay, so my question to you is, why are you getting flustered at the beginning? If it's because you didn't practice and you don't have it clear in your mind, then that's like totally your fault, and there's no good answer for how. The answer is you've already made the mistake. Another thing you might want to do is, when you're giving a slide talk, get a printout that has about a dozen slides per sheet. Because a really awful thing that happens is the person goes over and then, oh, that's what the next slide's about, right? So it shouldn't surprise you. It happens all the time. They hit next, and then they find out what the next part of the talk is about. Now, that's easy to happen, but if you have on the table in front of you the whole talk on 3 sheets of paper, which can be done, you're going to know the next slide. See, the hard part about a transition is you start it before you get to the next thing. You can't do a good transition if you don't know exactly what the next slide is. And it's very difficult to do it without notes. It was a challenge for me, and I only have 4 slides, right? It's just, and I practiced on Sally this morning. So in a stressful situation, and what I do is, in this sheet of paper, which has each of your slides, I do things like this to indicate where the end of one part is, and now I need to know a transition. And you can very unobtrusively just glance down at the table and see that. So to try to actually answer your question, you may want to just leap and do the transition, maybe a slightly more elaborate transition, and get to next part and get people caught up. But you need preparation in order to do this. You can't, no one just wings, okay, except for Luke, no one wings talks, okay? People prepare them and write them out. And I don't think you can over-prepare a job talk. You need to have it down pretty cold.
Transitions, I think of it as, there's different sections to the talk, and some sections can get really technical and people can kind of doze off, especially if they're on the edge of understanding to begin with. And so I really like this idea of, when you get to the end of the technical part, you just sort of step aside and say, so now that we've done the technical details, what we've shown is blah, 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 and we're going to be able to use this piece to be able to show this. And so all of a sudden, all that stuff, it's kind of like you've been granted a pardon to say, okay, well, I don't understand that technical stuff, but now I know the piece that matters, and that's the piece that I need to carry forth. And that's a good way of recovering. If you feel like you're losing people, you say, so what we've just done, so what I hope I've shown you is blah, 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 and so now we're going to use it to do this. You know, you need to, but that's a familiarity. You need to be familiar with the structure of your talk so that you can gather people up, you know, because they do, there's this, you know, as time goes by, they spread out, and then you've got to gather them again at the transition, and then they spread out and gather them. Hopefully everyone ends at the same point.